Kim. We do record all these sessions, and so just know that. We suggest that everybody mute themselves unless they're talking, just for better background noise. And one of the things logistically Kim and I have been talking about is that, you know, so many of us are spending so much time in front of our computers right now that, you know, we'd love your feedback about, we like the fact that this is a conversation and not just like a podcast that people listen to. So we want to keep having the conversation like this. And one of the things that Kim and I were talking about is thinking about how we could have this conversation without having to have people at their computers if they want to walk around. So that's just something, or if they want to move their bodies, or just anything other than looking at their computer. So we're thinking about that, and we'd love your feedback on that. The other thing is we've chosen this time, 1 o'clock on Sunday, Pacific time, and we'd like to hear your feedback on if there's a better day or time of week. Unfortunately, I can only do evenings and weekends, but you know, if like a Wednesday night at like 5:30 p.m. Pacific, I don't even know if that works for Kim or whatever, but like, just if there's another time that would be better and you feel like would be easier for you to dive into, let us know. If you want to receive these emails and you're not already on our list, or you want someone to be on this list, just reach out to me or Kim directly, or you can go to our website, which is thedoorofdivinity.com, and you can just sign up and receive emails from there.
It's the door to divinity.
Thedoortodivinity.com. Thank you.
I forget it even about the website. So yeah. I've said that several times too.
Yeah, perfect. So on that note, I think that's it for logistics. What Kim and I really would like to do today is have this be very much of a conversation and hear a lot from you. So we will set it up. We are going to start with a short practice, and then we're going to dive into some conversation after that. And the topic that came up last week that seemed to be of interest is kind of how we talk about death and how we talk about it, how that shapes how we relate to it, how other people talk about it, whether it was our family or our culture or whatever, or even the desire to not talk about it or the resistance in talking about it. So that was the topic. I think that's all I've got. Kim, anything else you want to say in terms of opening before we go into our practice?
Yeah, just that when we put out the email, kind of let's talk about death and kind of, you know, and what can begin because we're talking about death. I got a response from a friend. I'm not talking about death. You know, I've had so much death, and it was very interesting because, and I just spoke with her for about 5 minutes as far as, you know, kind of let's just really explore what you don't want to talk about. And, you know, it's very interesting because for her, it triggered, you know, her thoughts about people who have died. But then what happened is there's a lot of this emotional response that kind of showed up. And even saying, you know, with an incident that happened in her life that was very raw kind of in that moment with a family member. And I said, well, you do know that what you don't want kind of just that showed up. And in a way, by just looking at that, kind of feeling that, and closing the door to that, you know, see what happens and shows up. And within 2 days, she had a huge breakthrough because she's been kind of in grief for a long time. And so she had a huge breakthrough with her family member and in her business, in her company, just by being able to identify now kind of a new beginning and how she does want to create her relationships with people and family. And so just even closing the door to what she wanted to die in a sense for her, and it's been a pattern for a long time. So so I just want to say hello to where our thoughts and our emotions, a lot of times there's no relationship between those two. It's kind of like if you're talking to somebody and they are saying, you know, you're so nice, and you're feeling the opposite. You feel kind of, you know, just this response, this pain, you don't know what it is, you're just feeling off. And I think when we talk about death a lot, that's what happens. It's kind of like is what we say, and then there's this emotional response. So we're going to work a 3-part process today in just a very short kind of movement meditation, even though we're sitting down. And this process is about kind of what happens with our thoughts when we even hear or something triggers kind of a death or something connected to death. And or in our lives, it could be, you know, just a behavior or a mannerism that doesn't really work out for us. And we continually, you know, are kind of in a repetitive cycle of something we don't want. That's the first thing, kind of like we're going to be looking at that. And that second piece is kind of how we can be. Being is really having access to the emotion that we feel. So we're thinking one thing, we're feeling another thing. And it's the discrepancy between our thoughts and feelings a lot of the time connected to, you know, what we want to end, that we can't begin. And so we're going to do kind of this movement meditation. And the third step is our automatic responses. Because when we're in a situation or something comes up and we're just reacting and we're responding and we're not sure why, the automatic response is creating a reality. And it's reinforcing kind of the disconnect between the mind, the thoughts, and the being, kind of our emotions. And then the response continues to keep us in a cycle of maybe where we ultimately don't want to be, or it keeps us in a grief cycle for a long time. And so I want you to just close your eyes for a moment and just be aware of your breath. As you inhale for the count of 3, and just hold it. And exhale through your mouth at the count of 4, and just hold it. And as you continue to breathe, just be aware of your space and the space around you. And just identify maybe even a feeling or a thought that comes up, and just be aware of it without changing it. Especially connected to even the topic of death or something that you're trying to end or in an ending. And now connect into your heart and place your attention there. And focus on just the feeling, kind of how you're being. And as you are focusing on the breath, just start to notice with your thought and kind of this feeling of being, just how that feels. And start to notice just your response. Kind of a response means you are in fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And what happens kind of when you have thoughts or where they go, and this feeling, and do you, like my friend, do you say, I can't hear it? I don't want to talk about it. Just you kind of leave the space, maybe disassociate, just be aware without changing it. And then I want you to just open your eyes. And I want to do this movement meditation. And I want you to now allow, kind of follow your thought and just move your attention to a thought of something that is of grief, or maybe, you know, something that's coming up in your life that you want to end. And just start to notice that picture. And what a picture is what you continue to go to. Kind of our thoughts move to where our energy gets stored or stuck. So just notice that. And now drop into your heart. And start to move your hands back to your heart. And feel the energy in your heart of what that feels like. And now just allow your attention to move outward, and it may move to a different thought. And you may not even know what to think, but just allow the mind, it'll go somewhere. And now just drop into your heart and start to create this relationship and start to move your hands out, or just think this of where's my thought going? And then allow the heart to pull the attention back. As your attention goes out, our attention goes to those places where we get stuck. And when we drop into the heart, it starts to move back. Now, how we start to move energy is this. It's the connection between where our thoughts go and our energy pulling back. And I want you now to just even take your hands and start to move kind of your hands to the right, like a wave, and move them to the left. And let your eyes kind of follow as the right represents what you want, kind of the left, what you don't want. And I want you to allow your attention to go maybe into the thought of, maybe grief, or just what you think about that. And then just move it to the left. And each time the energy moves out, the heart pulls it back. And I want you to just notice this wave, this infinity loop. It's kind of like a conductor. And if you can move your hands down kind of at the lower part of your body, the lower chakras, of just moving it side to side. Wherever you're stuck, let it go out and then let it come back. And let your eyes kind of move to where your thoughts take you. You may not have a thought this moment, but notice if you have a feeling, a wave, a feeling of just like my friend, I can't talk about it. I feel overwhelmed. Just start to move now this wave up through kind of your central channel, kind of going side to side, and just kind of follow the hands and move it all the way up over your head. And this is where it's a great grief process if you're in a feeling or an emotion of grief or despair. As you start to move, now move it down and feel the grief moving through you like a wave, moving in, moving out, and bring it all the way down to the base of your spine. And then even take your finger, and I want you to just trace kind of a figure eight, moving the grief up, moving the grief down. And you can follow it with your eyes. As you move it up, you're moving it through the heart and then moving it down. And the way to change and transform any energy is you have to move it through these different spaces. Now see if you can move it with your left finger as you trace it, and start to notice, if you're left hand dominated, this may feel easy. If you're not, start to notice how this figure eight looks. See, for me, it's kind of flaring out to the left. It isn't quite vertical. And this means that it's kind of like I have a break or a block on my left. And that means my circuit isn't moving my energy. Now see if you can do it even with two hands like a wave. And start to notice as you're moving whatever feeling you have through the body, because we have to make it about the body to move grief, to move like a feeling or move the thoughts. The body will move it out. And start to notice, can you move this right through the heart and feel start to feel the lower loop. I'm looking at kind of everyone's energy. The lower loop, there's a break for many people. It's where the body hasn't quite processed. Now, just move actually a lower loop from your heart kind of down and kind of down to the ground, and then bring the energy up. I'm seeing in the lower 3 chakras, or the lower body of where people quite haven't processed maybe old grief through their body. And so this lower part is releasing, and now you're bringing energy up to renew the body. And really just start to kind of move that energy out. Unprocessed grief sticks in our body, stays in our body. And by just even moving kind of the arms, moving the energy, our energy will follow. And then let me just see one more time, kind of, we're just raising up any grief and receiving something new. Raising up kind of grief, and then opening up for peace or any type of new vibration. And then I want you to just move the energy kind of back and forth, kind of moving this new energy through the body as that wave. You can move it with one finger if that's easier. But what this is doing, it's weaving the vibration, because the energy moves right and left, and it also moves vertically. And you can even move this wave up vertically. Yeah. And then notice the mind can't be involved in this process, or even a lot of times I'll just move my finger. The mind, it starts to unify and just start to notice kind of this symphony, like a conductor, that you are moving this energy and it's starting to integrate. It moves out, it comes back. And just inhale and start to exhale, and just bring that energy through the body all the way down. And that is just a very little short process of moving kind of an emotion or an energy through the body. Everything moves in a cycle or a circle, active, passive. So when we can actually move our hands and kind of watch it with our eyes, we start to integrate then where our thoughts got stuck. Maybe like my friend, I can't handle grief. It's one more thing. Then you're in an emotion and you're not processing that emotion. And then by connecting to the pictures, bringing it through the heart, it starts to move the energy. Now we can do something with it. And by moving grief or whatever the emotion is, kind of up and down, right and left, we start to unify it and bring it in harmony and balance. And so today too, I just want to open up that if anyone is stuck anywhere, I'm here as an energy worker to respond to whatever you're dealing with. So now I'll turn it over to you, Val. And if you have any questions about that
I'm going to do my best to not talk, actually. I feel like we've been talking a lot.
Yeah.
I'm just going to make some time for people to think and respond, and I'm not going to fill the space for just a minute.
Yeah.
Ladies, I was reluctant to respond because I just got out of the shower, but here we go. I have a bathing suit on. I'm not naked, but I am. I just want to say, Val and Kim, thank you so much for this. Here we go. Got a bathing suit on. It's a gorgeous day here, I must say, in Mill Valley. And I think I am one of the very few people that is deeply appreciating and even having a good time during the shelter in place. I feel like I'm in a safe group to say that with right now, because I'm also talking about dying, right? So I just want to say, Val, what you said about you said something that kind of gave us permission to move around. And I just want to tell you, it's just like the reason I put myself with no video on is because when I do this work with you, all of you, Kim and Val, but everybody who's on the call, I do start feeling that movement of the energy in my body. And Kim, and so thank you for kind of giving us permission to do that, because I think that that's a important thing of when it starts moving, just to move it ourselves. And then Kim, I love how you do this thing and just always kind of come back to that really heart-centered, the energy of this kind of movement, because it's always spoken to me so much. And just really the two of you together, I think, are very powerful doing this work together. Because even me here, still getting things done around my house because I got kids at home and work to do and other Zoom calls, I'm feeling very connected and appreciative of what we are talking about right now. So I'm going to mute myself again, but I want to thank you for this.
Thank you. Can I ask you one thing though before you mute yourself?
Before I go away, yes.
Because you said something that I could relate to, which is, now I don't have kids, so my level of busyness is nothing compared to those that do.
Relative.
However, I have one of the things I wanted to let go of very much is this lifelong, almost addiction to busyness.
Yes.
And I am really wanting to transform out of busyness into productivity and intention and connection and what you're talking about. So I'm just curious, since you mentioned that in your life, is there something that you're hoping to let go of right now?
Yeah, I think, I'm 56. I am from a generation that really went through, I graduated from college in 86, and we were there in the go-go 90s when it was all about making money, but also start being spiritual, right? We were just starting to do yoga and meditate and all that stuff. And so there's been this like parallel track of be a spiritual being, but really make a lot of money and make a lot of impact in the world at the same time, right? And I think, I was definitely a certifiable workaholic for some of my 20s and 30s. And so I think that I always have to try to, and I've worked with Kim with some of these kinds of things. Kim, by the way, is just amazing. I've done one-on-one work with her. And Val, I'm looking forward to doing one-on-one work with you as well. I'd really love to dive more deeply into what you bring here, which is so awesome. I just feel like needing balance has been a forever mantra of mine. I started doing TM at 27 and Buddhist chanting in 29. And I've always been, yoga, meditation, all that. But this to me feels like a girl, if you don't fucking slow down right now and listen to what we have to say to you, then, you're never going to. This is part of it. It's why I'm in a bathing suit on Sunday right now, because my kids are with my ex and I want to lay in the sun and enjoy this beautiful place that we're in, and stop being fearful and self-doubting and all that stuff, and just go, yeah, we're here. We are at the shift of consciousness right now. So be willing to go inside, listen to guidance, talk about the deep shit, like death, and and all the other stuff. We're all like teachers and students right now, it feels like, so one of the things that keeps kids coming through to me is, for those of us that feel that we have some call to heal in any way, shape, or form, that we must take exquisite care of ourselves right now, right? Not just good care, but exquisite care of our beautiful, gentle, tender hearts and our relationships, all that. So Val, it's that quest for equilibrium, that we all want, so I think it's a deep call for all of us right now to just listen to our guidance. I'm delighted that you and Kim were guided to do this very needed work right now. I'd love to support you in any way. I just blasted it out to all literally my sisters and my girlfriends from high school in New Hampshire and Maine. literally. I was hoping some of them would be on because we have had some sudden deaths in our
Wow.
family. And, you know, it's like this is happening right now with coronavirus as well. People are not having the opportunity to, you know, have the conversations that they would have liked to have had, you know. And also, we need to think about, do we want to be intubated? Do we want to be on a respirator, ventilator, those kinds of things? It's like nobody wants to talk about that. So you guys are opening up a conversation and giving permission to talk about and feel about things that don't feel safe for us to talk about, like your friend Kim, right?
Yeah.
So giving her that opportunity is just such a gift. I'm really grateful for you both doing this work.
Well, and I just have to comment about you as far as, you know, being so productive, always doing, and now you are like the poster child in your bathing suit.
I can't believe it. I was running around, I'm looking for something to put on and there's nothing. So I'm like, I'm just gonna, you know, go on.
And I wanted to ask people too, you know, when we talk about death, there's so many euphemisms that we use to kind of describe death, because it is that thing we, you know, don't, like when somebody says somebody's died, what do you say? You know, and there's a sensitivity to how, you know, we feel, what we're supposed to say. And especially like with kids, you know, it's very important to they're concrete thinkers. And so, you know, we create all these confusing messages. Oh, they're asleep, or, you know, so it's like, how do all of you maybe talk about death? Or it doesn't necessarily, it could be connected, well, to somebody that has died, but just your thoughts. And
I like that question. What do you say when someone tells you that they've lost somebody?
Yeah, I always say sending light and love to your family at this time of transition.
Mm-hmm.
And it's fascinating because I always have a moment of hesitation before I say something.
Oh.
I intrinsically, sorry, I muted myself recently. I intrinsically feel the tension of conflict of beliefs. Like I believe that I am more progressive or less, more fluid than some other people in terms of my beliefs. So I'm always wanting to, my first goal in reaching out to someone who's lost someone is to acknowledge them and the full breadth of their journey, pain and beauty. But I also don't want to force my belief on them. And so I actually always hesitate, but I choose love and light this time in transition. And that just feels safe to me. But I feel like in this work, I might grow to even go further.
yeah.
I have one other question inspired by what Suzanne said. Because obviously each death involves very different circumstances. And like when my mom died, it was extremely unfinished for me. I was not in a place to know how to even handle death or anything. I was 18.
Mm.
And so I didn't deal with it at all. And later in life, as I tried to unwind and deal with it and actually process it, it involved a lot of letter writing to be able to have that conversation I wasn't able to have, or those number of conversations or whatever they may be. So something in what Suzanne said about, especially right now, I mean, people that are like actually physically alone, having to die alone physically, doesn't mean that they have to be alone energetically, and you can be there with them. And so, you know, I think there are ways to finish things even if you didn't get to do it before they actually died. And so I'm wondering if anybody's had any experience they'd be willing to share about a sudden death where they then had to figure out a way to make that process complete for them and the relationship they were in.
Yeah, I'd have something. Hi from Dublin. Sorry, it's bedtime here, so I'm sitting in my bed. I did work with Kim after my mum died last year, and what really helped me was the fact that I suppose the guilt you feel sometimes when somebody dies, that you could have done more, or as you say, people now are alone, and that's so horrible. And it's not that it's kind of cold, but one thing Kim said to me was, who do I think I am? Thinking that I could have changed her journey for her. And ultimately you are alone when you die. Even if people can be around you physically or energetically, ultimately you're on your own journey. And it's the same as when somebody dies. I don't say, oh, you were talking about what do you say when someone dies. And in my book, you can't fix it for them. You can't change it for them. You can listen. But ultimately, for someone to say to me, this is a really horrible time, to actually be able to sit with the pain that they're feeling and be okay with listening to that pain and give them the space to just say, this is a really horrible time. It's really painful. And because you can't help them and you can't go on their journey with them, and you don't want to take on their energy because that's detrimental for ourselves, it is just about witnessing somebody's pain and not being afraid of it, for either those who are grieving or for the people who are dying. That's what I think.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, Kate, especially not be afraid of it, because, you know, the conversation, just having the conversation where, you know, so many people, it's like, I don't know, the fear of what to say, the fear of just kind of being in it. Am I going to be overtaken by it? And just like you said, being there, allowing the grief, the pain, whatever emotion is there, and, you know, being able to hold space for that is so healing in itself. And it's so uncomfortable for most people, you know, just to acknowledge it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, because a couple of people I know have died. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
A couple of people recently who I know whose parents have died since my own mum. I've said to them, and it's my husband said this when his brother died, that your foundation stones have shifted so completely for you. This is a whole new way of living.
That's right.
Even sometimes to be able to being able to describe the pain for them a bit, if you've had something similar, is probably the only other helpful thing you can say.
Yeah.
And when he said that about his brother, and I thought about my mum, I was like, this is what's happening. My world has changed completely. And this is why I feel like I'm falling apart. But I'm not, because it's going to just resettle and I'm going to find a new way to be without this person. So I think that's, sometimes you can say something like that if your experience has been in some way similar. It can be helpful.
And I think that's the real validation of that person's life will never be the same anymore. And the death of the person they lost, but they're experiencing a whole death because their life is forever changed. And
Kim, are you able to do energy work with people before they leave their body if they're willing to do work as a family? You know, because I think that preemptive conversations, and Jennifer, I just want to just get back to it for a second. I love the words that you say to people because they're simple and they're just, you know, there's really not much we can say, but to say, you know, to acknowledge the transition, not the death, right? Because I think that this is part of what we want to be clearer on, is that this is an energetic transition. Right? It's hard to have those conversations right when you are in the throes of despair and grief for losing your mother or your beloved or your child or whatever. You just can't hear that. But if we start having the preemptive conversations, so like you, Val, if you had started talking to your mother, and for some reason, I have friends who lost their mothers very early. So it's been part of my life journey to understand the broken hearts of my beautiful friends who lost their mothers early and didn't have closure, right? And so I just feel like, you know, we can, us women that are willing to talk about this, and men, but, you know, to normalize this conversation so that, you know, we are talking about, you know, Kate, I went to a beautiful Irish wake one time. I really did. I mean, it was like I flew into Dublin and went right to a wake because my boyfriend's uncle had just died. And I have to tell you, I've never seen such a celebration of life, and I got it, you know, at that time. You know, and there was also the deep mourning, but it just seemed like they were prepared for this in some way, in a way that we are not here in this country where we couldn't even say cancer when I was a kid, you know, especially not breast cancer, right? I mean, it was like, it's just like, we're just able to talk about things, you know, Me Too movement, you know, death is it's like a new frontier of how we're going to talk about it. So I think right now, you know, hospice really started huge with the AIDS crisis, right? And then suddenly now we understand the death journey, the death experience, and there's research being done it and everything. And now what you guys are doing, but I really think starting to normalize this conversation is so important. So I hope that you guys do more things about, you know, how do we prepare? You know, because there's the death experience, yes, but then there's also the death conversation that might happen beforehand in order to make the death experience even joyous, maybe.
Yeah, like ceremony, like I was a geriatric care manager. And so, and part of that process, it's kind of like a birth plan. You know, there is a death plan, and so, yes.
Yes, absolutely. It is exactly like that. Do you want an epidural? Do you want to be on a ventilator? How long? Right? How long? Do you want a feeding tube for how long? These are literally questions that need to be asked, you know, but that's, you know, further back. But it's just like, we just have to normalize this. You know, there was a time that we used to go in and have babies and we didn't have a say in how we did it, right? We have a current system right now where we go into a hospital to die. We don't really have that much of a say in how we do it, right? But we can do that. You know, birth plans are, you know, only 20 years old. I mean, 15 years old, you know, birth plans weren't around in the 60s, 70s, right? I don't know when they came into being, but I think, you know, these kinds of living wills, but in a more family, not with your family attorney, but with people like you, like us, just talking about it. So anyway, I just want to say again, I love you're doing this.
Go ahead, Kim.
Yeah, I was going to ask Kate, you know, since you are in Ireland, what have you experienced? I mean, your family could be different. It's not like all the Irish are the same and kind of the processing the grief and death. But I don't know, do you have anything to share just culturally?
Yeah, we didn't talk about cancer either when I was a kid, so we're not that different. Suzanne, I'm afraid
well, you're like I'm Irish. I'm Irish Catholic, right? You know what I mean? I know it's like a Freeman Young, and you know what I mean, Mildred. I mean, we're all from back there.
Well, I've experienced funerals in California of my friend's child, and I've experienced ones in New Zealand, and I lived abroad, experienced in Scotland, and really, I suppose in Ireland, what I found when I was here was the ceremony was enormous. We have days of celebration of someone's life and of the mourning. In the UK, they take 2 weeks between death and funerals because of logistics, which is we find a bit horrendous. I mean, we had 3 days between my mum's death and her burial, and it was too soon. Actually, I needed more time. But we just have constant family and like you guys too, sandwiches and, you know, plates of lasagna being delivered to the door. But there's an awful lot of ceremony in our country, and I'm not a practicing Catholic. I'd be very spiritual, but I'm not a practicing Catholic. And yet the church was amazing. And I've been to funerals in funeral homes or, you know, specially built centres, and I just find them soulless and without presence and without gravitas. I walk into a church and it's like, boom, you know, it's like, whoa, it's this big, it's just a big, it's huge, it's enormous, even without any belief in Jesus or trust in the Catholic Church. I still believe in the basics of it. So the ceremony is enormous. It goes on for quite a long time. And the stories of the person, and for me that's what it's about. I can't do it in a day. How can you process it in a day? How can you say goodbye to somebody in a day? Like, how can you do that? This person who's been part of your life since you were, it doesn't matter who they are. I just think to think that you could say goodbye in a day is insane. The cultures where you mourn for a week, or you have various ceremonies. It's not actually about the church or which God you believe in. It's really about the time you're taking to do that. Because, yeah, otherwise I think it's just too short.
wanted to make a couple observations on what I heard, and then also just as you were talking just now, Kate, about the length of time, a couple things came into my mind as we did this sort of movement. I noticed completely different than like just a seated quiet meditation. I actually could feel energy moving, which was very different, and very different than if I wasn't moving, right? And you know, I don't think we do have to say goodbye. We can, like Kim, you always say, we can say hello. We can say hello to that person's spirit. And it lives on in different ways. They are just, and it will always live on in different ways. And it will always, that grief just kind of, it comes and goes, right? And it was interesting because, you know, Suzanne, I mean, my father passed away. The reason we're doing this is Kim and I have worked together for over a decade. My dad passed in January. She worked with him to guide him through this process, through the other side. And it was maybe the most transformative moment of my life. I mean, his death was like the most beautiful thing I've ever witnessed. So that's when I was like, well, we have to figure out how other people can have this experience. And not everybody can, but he was prepared for it. He had already somehow pulled the whole family together right before Thanksgiving to talk about how he wanted to die and what he was going to put up with and what he wasn't. And he didn't want to be intubated and he didn't want extreme surgery. And so that when he had a stroke and his wife had, you know, less than 5 minutes to make a decision about life-saving surgery, and she said no, which is the hardest thing to say because you want to hang on to that person. This is something Kim touched on in that first session, is like the people that are still alive are the ones sort of pulling that spirit back, even if that person didn't think about, I don't want to be intubated or I do or whatever. Once they're in that moment, I'm sure, Kim, they know what they want probably, but they can't express it. And so the best thing we can do is get back to that witnessing. And so this is kind of what you were talking about earlier, Kate, like to the extent that we can witness other people's shift in energy, be compassionate, not get involved in it. So this is one of my problems. I used to think that the way you can be most compassionate is just kind of get right down in there with them, right? I think that's a very sort of female, maybe instinctual thing. And again, we talked about this in our first session, but it's like, there's nothing actually beneficial about doing that. So this practice of witnessing other people's pain gives you a big container to be okay with it without getting into that container with them. And this is all part of, you know, yoga and meditation practice, witnessing our own mind, witnessing where our energy goes, right? And how, you know, to what you said about like taking exquisite care of, frankly, our energy right now. So, you know, when I think taking care of myself, I think of it very westernized, like eating the right foods and getting enough sleep and exercising and whatever. But I think right now the discipline is about like, there is so much chaos, and how can you stay in the eye of that storm?
Yes, this is part of the exquisite care, by the way. Right here, right now, with all of you, is part of me taking exquisite care of myself. And I think all of us doing that for each other and ourselves as well. You know, this is, I just wanted to say, this is part of it.
Yeah.
That going the extra mile, you know, over and above the Western care of eating right and sleeping and, you know.
Yeah. I wanted to ask Betsy to talk a little bit about the process in Judaism of Shiva and kind of what your experience has been with that. You know, Betsy, I think part of what you shared last week helped us inspire this conversation, and you too, Jen. So can you talk a little bit about that just from a cultural perspective?
I can try. Yeah, did I say something good last week? I don't even remember.
Well,
yeah.
You can say that you were raised in a culture where death was talked about.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
And that shaped your experience.
Yeah, no, that's right. Now I remember. Yeah. It's interesting too, Kate, based on what you were talking about, right? Because in Judaism, we want to get the person buried as quickly as possible, as quickly as possible. So when someone dies, it is required that there is a person with the body until the body gets in a casket. The body is never left alone from the moment that person dies. And it's considered a mitzvah, like a highest good deed, to sit with a body. And the idea is that the person who's sitting with the body is praying, and the prayers that that person is saying, it's actually a specific role in a community for that person, is saying prayers to help that soul ascend, to help that soul detach from the body. So so we try to, there's no embalming, you're dressed in very simple, like linen clothing. It's very simple, and then a very simple pine casket, and to be as you came from the earth, to return to the earth as quickly as possible. However, the sitting Shiva, it's part of, Sheva in Hebrew means 7. So traditionally you would sit a formal Shiva for 7 days. So like in the Orthodox community, you cover the mirrors, you rip your clothing, which now they don't. They'll wear like a little piece of black fabric or something they'll pin, but they used to like tear their clothing, like a piece of clothing. Cover the mirrors. If you're a man, you don't bathe, you don't shave for 7 days. The idea is to totally immerse yourself in your grief for a whole week with your community. And you cover the mirrors because during that time, you're meant to sit just with yourself, to feel how you feel, to pray, to connect, to cry, to be with community. So the people who are sitting Shiva are never left alone. People bring food and they pray together twice a day, every day, for 7 days. But then for the family, at that point, the community is kind of off the hook. And then for 30 days is considered the period of mourning, where, again, for Orthodox Jews, for sure, the mirrors stay covered. They'll bathe and so forth, but they're not allowed to work. They're not allowed to, like, you wouldn't go to synagogue at that point. You're literally just home in your grief for a whole month. Mm. And then the next step is that it's actually really interesting. There's 11 months where you then go to your community for 11 months from the time the person dies. And the whole community comes together to pray for the ascension of the soul of that person who has died, to help them on their journey. And by the 12th month, they're like, okay, now you're on your own, soul of person who died. You got this. We've had your back for almost a whole year. You got it now. And then every year, it's called a yurt site, where you go every year on the anniversary of that person's death, and you say a prayer for the ascension of the soul of that person. So it's very involved, as all things Jewish tend to be. There's all kinds of ritual and like things that are supposed to happen and have to happen, and you know, but it's very clear in Judaism that to not pretend, and I certainly grew up that way in my home, to not call it like, oh, you know, grandma's gone. Like, no, she died. That means her soul, her body isn't here, but it means that her soul. So we say in Judaism, there's actually a Hebrew saying, but it basically translates as, may their memory always be for a blessing. And so kind of similar, Jen, to what you were saying. It's like love and light in your time of transition. It's like, may this memory of this person, may this memory always live on in you as a blessing. And so the idea is really that their souls, because we're all part of God and Judaism, we're all a divine spark. So when a soul dies, it doesn't mean it leaves. It's just that still part of that soul remains within us. So that's as much as I know.
That's beautiful.
Awesome. Thank you. Sure. Thank you.
Well, you know, I just want to say that there's such a lightness. I was really enthralled with everything you're sharing. There's such a lightness to it. Even though you're talking about giving in fully to your grief, there's a lightness of bearing that comes from just surrender. And so I just felt that. And I just always appreciate what Judaism has brought to our society. So thank you.
Yeah. And I have to say, you know, because I am part Mexican, you know, that whole, and I'm very connected, especially to ancestors. And, you know, like the anniversaries are extremely important when someone dies. And you can feel like every year, and, you know, when you especially acknowledge that soul, their changes, kind of how they've grown. And this whole acknowledgement, you know, of even co-creating with them is extremely important because, you know, they're coming to say hello. And if you can start to create something new with them, because they are in practice of creating something new, of wanting to know how to kind of bring it in a physical form. And even if you believe in reincarnation or not reincarnation, but even if they've reincarnated, because I've seen this, how their soul is still kind of working in there. And so it's really a beautiful thing of when you can say, hey, mom, or hey, grandma, because I do this all the time with my grandmother, you know, what do you want to create? Let's, you know, start something new. Let's begin something completely new. And I know like how I'll start to see new things. It'll start to be revealed in a new way. And so much of kind of what comes through in that time is like our co-creation together. So this whole communication with the people that have passed, it's so important because it's so real. It's so real to me. And like I've said before, that the people who have passed are more alive really sometimes than people that are, you know, here. But in those kind of, especially around Halloween, I put an altar up for my whole genetic line. My whole wall in my house is like, I've gotten back to the 1700s, you know, in Italy and, you know, in Ireland and in Scotland and all of these places where, you know, I'm saying hello, praying to them all. And they're telling me kind of what do they want to, what do they need help with even? What do we want to end? Kind of what ending do we want to do? And what new beginning do we want to create? So that has really transformed, I think, my life, just because there was a grandmother that was very mean to my father, and I never would say hello. And it wasn't until I started to do this kind of yearly process and kind of work with her that my father really started to make major shifts. And so healing kind of those old wounds that, you know, and now the relationship is in a completely different space. And I can see it in my whole family. And if there's something even within my sons, I start to see of maybe the great-grandfather of like, oh boy, that's coming through. I start to work with the ancestor, you know, and try and shifting it. And so it's very present and alive.
I just wanted to throw one thing out there too, is I'm so grateful, Kate, thank you so much for sharing your experience, and Jen and Suzanne, because I believe that, you know, it's like we know how to do a lot of things. Like we know how there's so many books on like how to live and how to live your best life and how to all of that stuff. And I so appreciate hearing people's stories of grief, not to be weird, but I really appreciate it because I feel like there's just a huge a door opening, and what you, Val and Kim, what you guys are doing, and what this community, this Sangha that you're creating is doing, is creating this like how to die, and not just how to die, but and we talked about this before, like we become immortal because we die little deaths all the time. I mean, Kate, you said there's like this shift, like there's this new way of being. So that old me has to die, so the new me sort of arises out of this in some way. But just so much spaciousness for permission about not just how to die, but how to grieve. And what does that even mean? And being in that conversation, because it almost, in our society, it's almost like shameful in a way. Like, oh, well, but she died a long time ago. Like, why are you still sad? Or whatever, you know? And so just all this space to have these conversations, which I so appreciate. So maybe next week, there might be a question. I'm not sure if there's even a question in there somewhere, but something about like how do we gather as community and hold space for each other? Like, what do you say? Like Jen, you said, I would even take it further. Like, I'd love to know maybe next weekend, like, what does that mean? Or what does that look like? Or how, or Kate, like you were saying, like, maybe you just need to hold space for someone who feels horrible and just be like, yeah, you feel horrible. I'm here for you. Just feel horrible. I got you. Like how we can do that better for each other and for the community. So I guess that would be my ask, maybe, to throw on the docket for next time.
Awesome. Thank you. And Kim gave me a great idea that I didn't have before about death anniversaries. Like, how do we...
Death anniversaries.
I mean, in some way, it's like, you know, we think about their birthday, but it's like, what about the date? I love your ritual there. Like, that's really cool. And it's what an interesting way to keep them alive, and to kind of what you're, you know, in your thoughts, and asking them like, what do we want to let go of now? What do we want to create now? What a cool way to do that. I love that. And thanks for teeing up thoughts for next time, Betsy. We are just a little over 2 o'clock Pacific time. So any other requests, you're also welcome to email.
Yeah, just a quick request. I know that last week Kim talked about the veil being thinner at 2 points, and I would love to know more about that, especially as it relates to, you know, when to do ritual. And I think it came up again today when you said, okay, Grandma, what do you want to co-create? You mentioned that at the points of the veil, so I'd love to learn more about that.
And Kate, you brought something up too. I think that you know, that would be good to talk about is, you know, when we hold space for people, we can be that rock, we can, you know, be that strong person, but a lot of times that will, you know, kind of enter in our space, and then what do we do with it, you know? And that's, you know, we can really show up for others, but then like Suzanne was saying, how can we really care for ourselves? Suzanne works a lot with kind of healing the healers. How do we really care for ourselves, and what kind of care we can give ourselves and support?
What about even next week if we did just a practice on, you know, holding space and learning how to be that witness for yourself and for others, and then moving into a conversation like we did today.
Yeah, sounds good. And you know, what you were saying, even Betsy, like when you're holding space for others, we can't know what death is going to do to somebody, because our experience of grief is completely subjective in a way, because it's all about our relationship with death, our relationship with that person, our relationship with ourselves. And, you know, Betsy, you were saying about like, how do we know, you know, about grieving, and all the books you have about the 5 stages of grief, and now there's apparently 6. Whereas I'm like, nobody, so I'm going to swear now, nobody bloody knows what your bloody stages of grief are going to be. Like, I mean, there's 6 kids in my family. The 6 of us reacted completely differently. I sat there and watched as every sibling just did these bizarre maneuvers of whatever was happening in the week after my mum died. And I'm like, why are you behaving? Like, I loved them. I watched them. I thought, there's their grief being acted out in their way. So nobody can say the way you're feeling is normal, except that the way you're feeling is normal, because it's the way you're feeling. It is the way you're feeling, full stop. And it's normal. It's fine. If you want to go shopping for a week, whatever you bloody do to get over the week is fine. And holding the space for somebody is also a non-judgmental sitting with how they are, because that's how they grieve. And I have sisters who say, after 6 months, I felt okay about mum. After 6 months, I kind of felt I was okay. And then I have other sisters on the phone saying, I can't believe she's dead. I can't believe she's gone. And they cry like it was yesterday. So if we are going to talk about how to hold spaces for people, I'd love to look at exploring that a bit more, you know.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, Kate, as far as the year goes on, the grief can be as present as it was yesterday. And the grief and how we move with the grief can totally change into kind of our habits or our responses and what that even looks like years beyond.
Yeah. Thank you all so much for coming and joining, and everybody for participating. And I think we will see you back at the same time next weekend for now, unless I get a lot of responses saying that this isn't a great time and you'd prefer a different time, open to suggestions. But until we move it, I think we'll keep it here for now. And we will send out the recorded session for anybody that you want to forward it to, or let us know, or go to our website if there's anybody else that wants to join the conversation with us.
Yeah, I'll be sending out kind of the video, but we have an app where I'm going to send out a link where you can listen to it as an audio too, if you want. That way you can be walking around moving, and you won't see our faces, but you'll be able to hear it. The app, when I send it, it will go in your junk mail, and so you'll have to get it out of the junk mail, and then it's easy to download, and then all of these things can be found in the app that I've created.
The name of the app, she just did this for me and I'm not technologically savvy, is called Soundwise. It looks like, that's my dad, by the way, but that's, you see the little Soundwise thing? That's the app. And so that's where Kim's been downloading her sessions, which is super awesome. So thank you all.
Okay, thank you
Have a
guys.
nice to all of you.
Have a great day. Bye. 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 Bye, Betsy. Bye, Suzanne. Bye, Kate. Bye.